play to save the season. The throw, fire, and down! Incomplete, down at the goal line by San Diego! Tomlinson, off the left side, Tomlinson sidestep. Hello, history books. Think they have to now. Here's Sproles. Sproles inside the 10, inside the 5, and the Chargers win the game.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to After Hours. Sorry for that delay. Not really sure what happened. We were having some technical issues with our mics, but we appreciate you guys being patient with us then, and also as we postponed so I could watch Grace play softball this evening. But welcome. We're happy to have you, and it is time to break down the Chargers-Lions game. So I'm not really sure, Craig, if you've thought about how you want to start. Where do you think the best starting point is?
Okay, so let's start off with the positives, right? Because there were plenty, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So we had, I guess we do want to call it a vintage top level Justin Herbert sighting towards the second quarter and into the second half. So that was great to see. After the last few weeks, I know that he's kind of been in question, and this game also didn't start off so hot. He looked really, really tentative, and to give the offensive line credit, they held up pretty well today. They didn't allow any sacks at all, so also something to be pretty proud of. And I mean, he dealt throughout the game. He kept the Chargers in the game in what ended up being a high-scoring shootout. I think was that Glover, did he predict that in you guys' walkthrough? I think he said it was going to be one. Yeah, so he called it. That's exactly what it turned into. And, Herbert was game for it. And thank God for Keenan Allen, because without him, I don't know where this team would be. And the two of them together basically kept the Chargers afloat. So it's just good to see Herbert perform to the level that we knew that he could. The start again was a little rocky, as I mentioned before, but definitely something to hold on to. Probably going to need much more of that if the Chargers hope to make the playoffs. But for tonight, he did a more than quality job.
Yeah, Herbert was great. Excuse me. Sorry about that. He was fantastic today. There were some issues. I thought there was some reason for concern early in the game. You mentioned the first quarter plus, he wasn't very good. He was struggling with some interior pressure. Guys weren't getting open. He was holding the ball quite a bit, wasn't using his legs to extend plays, and just didn't look very confident in anything that was going on. And there was even a drive, I think it was early second quarter. They were either down 10-3 or 17-3 at that point, right after his turnover, his interception, where they ran the ball on first and second down for next to nothing. And my immediate takeaway was, oh shit.
Yeah.
They don't trust him today. This is going to get ugly fast. But to his credit, he turned it around. I thought something that kind of jump-started him was there was a play where it looked like he was going to get sacked, and he used his legs to not just get out of the pocket, but pick up a first down. And even Tony Romo said something to the effect of, like, that's something he needs to do more of. He's got to use his legs, and his coaches have talked to him about that. And that kind of seemed to get him going and get him comfortable. And he found a rhythm passing, and everything started clicking. They ran the ball better at times late in the game. They were getting chunk plays in the passing game. And Herbert was just on for the better part of 3 quarters today. Off schedule, on schedule, under pressure, clean pocket. It didn't matter. He was great. And like you said, Craig, the pass protection was really good for the most part. He was taking some hits early, but they really seemed to kind of sack up and elevate their level of play after about the first quarter.
Yeah, I mean, as far as what he put into the game, I'm not sure whether it was, that initial scramble that kind of got the juices flowing for him or what, but It's like something just went off, something clicked. He pretty much knew the game was probably going to have to be on his shoulders offensively. I mean, it's no different than many other weeks, but it became really evident, I'm sure, to him early on. There was probably going to have to be every time I touch this ball, I'm going to have to look to score points. It's not just going to be enough to move the ball and maybe into just field goal range and depend on field goals. I believe at one point the Chargers scored on 5 consecutive drives. They scored touchdowns, and they still lost the game by 3 points, which is kind of crazy to say out loud when you think about it from that level of efficiency on the offensive side of the ball. But, I mean, in addition to Herbert, I don't know what else we can say about Keenan Allen other than he may be, outside of Justin Herbert, the lifeblood of this team. At one point, you probably could say that about Austin Eckler, but I think he's taken a back seat there, probably the number 2 option in regards to the offense where Herbert's distributing the ball. But Keenan is just all around excellent. And I'm willing to say right now, wherever you want to put him, you can put your list out there as far as the top route runners of all time goes, however you want to mention them. He's got to be somewhere in that top 10. And what makes it even more tremendous is the fact that he does it without having the athletic acumen that some of these other guys have. Like some of the top wide receivers in the league right now, they can just win off of pure athleticism. Keenan can't match them there. But what he can do is beat you with technique and nuance. That post route that he won on, that's not a designed route. The little extra that he gave on that in and out before he makes his break at the top of his route, that's not how that route's designed to be run. That's just he added a little bit of his own flavor to it to get open. That's what created that separation. And you don't see guys setting up DBs that way, but he does it consistently. He's got these little hitches to his route that he and Herbert understand perfectly. They're completely in sync there. Herbert knows exactly when to let the ball go, not to let it go too early, to kind of let Keenan do his thing at the top of his routes. I'm sure he maybe even extends them before his breaks a little bit more than you should. I mean, typically, if you're looking at a post, depending on where the sticks are or what the goal of the actual route is, as opposed to breaking it off at 10 and going into his post, he might take an extra 2 yards to give you a little in and out hesitation and then break into it to get some more additional space to get the ball to him. But outside of that, whether it's working the insides, the outsides, setting guys up for short to long plays, just kind of with the level of route running that he has, it's something to behold. And I text you guys in the group chat that they'd be screwed if he gets hurt. And when you know it, maybe about 10, 15 minutes later, he goes out. So I almost thought I jinxed it for a bit. But this team needs Keenan Allen in the worst way. And I will commend Justin Herbert for what he did while Keenan was out. He was able to find Jalen Guyton, which was great, even though, it's not the way that we want to see Jalen Guyton be utilized. But ultimately, I think you have to give credit where credit is due on the offensive side of the ball. This game came down to Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, and it felt like whoever had the ball last was going to win. Unfortunately, the Chargers just ran out of time.
Yeah, I think Kellen Moore was taking a lot of heat early in the game in our Discord about the play calling and how the offense was performing. And I think rightfully so early in the game, but it seemed like they figured some things out with the passing offense today. They weren't trying to throw the ball to the perimeter as much. It seemed like they were really working those crossers, the slants and the digs, trying to find the middle of the field behind the linebackers. And they had a lot of success doing that, in my opinion. It's what got QJ going for a stretch in the game. We saw them hit Guyton a handful of times. Eckler was effective in the passing game. Keenan was getting huge chunk plays. And it seemed like they just kind of hopefully found an identity in the passing game, because it's really felt kind of disjointed and disorganized for most of the season. And to see them just attacking the middle of the field, giving Herbert time, attacking the middle of the field, running those crossers and getting yards after catch opportunities. It was just really good to see, because it's not something they've done consistently. And Detroit's got a pretty good defense. So to be able to put up 38 on them like that, I think was huge for this offense. It says a lot about them. We'll get to the defense later, but it says a lot about the offense.
Yeah, actually extremely thankful for the fact that Kellen Moore realized, and I'm sure he knows this, it's not like it's been static throughout the season, but they moved Keenan around a bunch today. And it's what lended to them being able to move the ball a little bit more down the field more consistently. They weren't allowing the Lions to kind of key in on him in any real given point of the field. They used him in a short and immediate portion of the field. The Chargers don't really have a deep option to speak of right now, but they kind of took what the defense was willing to give them, but also setting up Keenan in situations where he could get the ball in his hands and make something happen after the catch, which he's also very, very good at. So I know that, like you mentioned, Kellen Moore has taken some heat, but today I think with regard to the passing game, he actually did a very, very good job, considering that, the running game had its moments here and there, but it's still not anything consistent, nor are they able to run the ball downhill in a power game, as they said they were going to do this year. So thinking about all the things that Moore has to work around because what their base is or what they planned on being isn't working says a lot, because you generated near 40 points, essentially being one-dimensional today, and only really having one true offensive threat in Keenan Allen. Eckler was very much so limited. Doesn't look like the Eckler of old. I'm not saying anything about him, falling off. I'm not ready to say that at all. I just don't think they're utilizing, I've said this a bunch of times, their guys most effectively right now. And I still have no idea what's going on with Isaiah Spiller. We may not even get to that at this point, but they're not even using Joshua Kelly as they should in the power game. So you're activating two running backs. You're probably using Eckler a little bit too much between the tackles, and also would love to see a bit more usage with Eckler and Kelly on the field at the same time. Make the defense respect the option of either having to run or pass. And I know that with Kelly on the field, you're not necessarily afraid of him getting open on the field for receptions. You're looking at him as more of that downhill runner. But again, give Kellen Moore credit. He got creative with Keenan, and it's what kept the Chargers in the game. And, hopefully moving forward, he can find a few more options with dual running backs, because Keenan can't be the end-all be-all in the offense. Gerald Everett went out again today, so that's another offensive weapon, specifically a yak guy that you don't have now. Not sure how long he's going to be out. Hopefully he's back next week. But there are going to have to be more options, and Kellen's going to have to get a bit more creative, because not every team is going to allow Keenan to just run wild and free like that. Even if you're moving him around, they're going to key on him, and they're probably going to find a way to limit some of those bigger plays that he made, such as today. So Kellen's got his work cut out for him for the rest of the season if they can't get the running game established or another receiving option going.
Yeah, I thought Eckler looked pretty good at times today. He doesn't look as explosive as he has in the past, but he was great on that screen pass that set up, I think, the first score. And he had some pretty good runs where he kind of hid behind the offensive line and found a small hole and slipped through 4 or 5 yards. And like I said, there's a stretch there where I think in the fourth quarter, he had run the ball 16 times for 64 yards. And if they're averaging 4 yards or more on the ground behind this offensive line, the way it's been performing in the running game, that to me is success, because that's keeping balance and that's giving them an opportunity to not be predictable. So there were some times there where I thought Eckler looked pretty good. I think the concern that I have is they're just soft up front. They talk a lot about winning the line of scrimmage and power running game downhill. It's what they do best, but it's not who they want to be. Mm-hmm. And they just can't run the ball. I mean, if it wasn't for a 1 yard pass to QJ on third or fourth down, they would have been stopped on the goal line by the Lions in the fourth quarter, and that game looks totally different. So you'd like to see them be able to run the ball more in, third and short, fourth and short. It's just not who they are. But they were having some success on first and second down, and Eckler looked pretty good at times. So I'm not sure I would say he doesn't. I mean, he's not the explosive monster that he was for the last few years, but he's also pushing 30. But he's still been pretty productive at times. They don't know who they want to be on the ground, or at least who they want to be on the ground does not match the personnel they have. Is probably the better way to put it.
Yeah, all fair. And I think a lot of some of what limits Eckler currently isn't necessarily the fact that he doesn't, say, have like the gas that he used to. They're just limited on offensive options. So the field isn't as open for him as it's been in the past. You're down Mike Williams. You're down Josh Palmer. So right now, your primary offensive weapons are going to be Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. So defenses don't have a whole lot to select from, and someone's probably going to get the short end of the stick. And it's kind of working to Austin Eckler's detriment, which is why I would love to see them get more of, well, I'm going to have to say Josh Kelly and Eckler on the field at the same time, because apparently Isaiah Spiller is just not an option.
So I'm seeing something in the chat that I wanted to bring up because I must have missed this. And apparently Kellen Moore told Romo that QJ can't read the playbook. Did you catch that?
Okay, so I think the comment that's being mentioned here is in reference to Romo stating that QJ hasn't had to understand more than one position as a wideout. Moving around from like the slot to X to Z, he's limited in that way. It's not something that he had a bunch of experience with at TCU. I don't necessarily think that he meant that to say that he can't read the physical playbook. I didn't hear that. At least that's not what I took from it. I just think that it's one of those things where we've heard about QJ being developed all year long, and he's kind of has a little bit of a learning curve because of the limitations of what he was asked to do in college. So yeah, I didn't necessarily take it that way, but I mean, I guess I could understand why you might have heard it.
Interesting. I didn't catch that. I do know there have been times where it seemed to me like he was out of position. There was a play on a third down, I think it was in the first quarter, where Keenan ran like a comeback, and it looked like Herbert was trying to get Keenan the ball, but QJ ran like a slant or a quick in within like 3 yards of Keenan on the right side of the field. And you could just tell by the congestion and the spacing that was not where QJ was supposed to be. And I think Herbert wound up overthrowing the ball or throwing it away because there just wasn't a window to get it to Keenan because of where QJ was. And there have been other times where, they were running like a wide receiver, like a pick play where he was supposed to, kind of close the distance between himself and a corner in the end zone, and he didn't run the route properly, and it kind of gave the corner a chance to come up and make a play. Things like that, where it just seems like he's not, like the detail isn't there. So I don't know that he can't read the playbook, but I do think there are times where he is not executing the way they are asking him to execute, whether it's blocking or being a decoy or just where he is on the field based on what they're trying to do with a particular play. Just seems like he's out of position quite a bit.
I agree that I think that he has an issue understanding how things work spatially, because more often than not, as you mentioned, it seems like there is a lot of congestion in certain areas when he runs his routes. He actually has a tendency in certain instances when he's not open to break into areas of the field that I don't think he's supposed to. He just doesn't understand how to work to get open, particularly when he's covered. He has a tendency to kind of drift into other players' route paths, so it creates less spacing, and Herbert ends up trying to fit balls into areas that can potentially end up being turnovers or throws that could result in turnovers. So yeah, QJ's got a lot of growing up to do. I know that he wasn't asked to do a bunch in college, but now we're talking about being more than halfway through a season. I guess you can kind of understand now why they're not leaning on him more heavily. Unfortunately, he's going to have to grow up in a hurry now because, as we saw today, in scenarios where Keenan goes down, because that's very possible, it could happen. They're lucky to this point to not have had it happen. But now down your wide receiver 2 and 3, kind of playing Russian roulette there. So dude's going to have to stay in the books like throughout the week, getting into practice early, maybe, putting in some extra reps outside at the end of practice with Herbert. Not saying that he's not doing that already, but he's just going to have to spend some additional time, as much as he possibly can, working on his craft, because moving forward, like I said before, you're not going to be able to just rely on Keenan Allen, and you can't just rely on him being healthy for the duration of the season. It's a lot to ask of a player of his age at this point in his career.
Yeah. Sorry, getting over the flu. Anyway, you mentioned earlier that, you don't know where they would be without Keenan, and God forbid he should get hurt. I think something positive came, hopefully, from him getting hurt today, and that is Justin had to trust somebody else. We saw them involve QJ a little bit more, including in the red zone, which I thought was really encouraging. The drops were kind of hard to watch. You can still see the hands being an issue. he's just not physical at the catch point for a guy his size. So some of those, back shoulder catches and the deep balls down the sideline into tight coverage, some of those plays just aren't, it's not the right time to be throwing those to him because he's just not physical enough at the catch point. But to see them unlock him underneath the quick slants and the crossers was really encouraging. Seeing them draw up a crucial red zone play for him and having it work was super encouraging. And you also see them trying to find ways to get Guyton involved beyond just chucking it deep to him. So forcing Herbert to trust somebody else, having him do that and have success throwing to guys other than Keenan, hopefully it makes this offense a little bit more diverse and it makes them a little bit less predictable and gives Justin the confidence to take his eyes off of Keenan every once in a while and go in a different direction. Because I think that's something that's been holding the offense back at times is he doesn't trust some of these guys or he's just not sure they're going to be where they're supposed to be. So he's locking in on Keenan and it's causing problems. And seeing them slowly but surely make some of those plays, I think should help him come away from that, come off Keenan at times. And it's just going to make them that much more dangerous. And it's going to help Keenan get open because teams won't be able to bracket him and defend him the way they've been defending him at times because he's willing to go to other people. So I think that's a huge thing for this offense taking the next step is Keenan got hurt. He missed some time. Guys stepped up. Then he was able to come back and help out. But those guys I think they needed to see that they could contribute and step up. And Herbert needed to see that they could contribute and step up.
Yeah, I'm just hopeful that this wasn't one of those scenarios where he did what he had to do because he didn't have any other choice. And that, in the weeks moving forward, he still allows those guys to be a part of the game flow. It's just a lot to ask of one person to carry you offensively, specifically in the passing game. So every touch these guys can get where they can gain some confidence helps. And yeah, every rep that they can get with Herbert delivering the ball helps as well. But the Jalen Guyton situation is a little tricky because he's known for one thing. And then this week we saw him have to be utilized in a different manner because it might just be me, but I don't know if he's fully back or trusts that knee. He also looks like he's put on a little bit of weight, so he doesn't have the deep speed that he had or has been known to have. And someone mentioned it before, I think maybe in the Discord about him getting 50-50 balls. And I don't necessarily believe that they're throwing 50-50 balls to him. I just think Herbert's trying to lead him deep, but he's just not getting behind defenses like he had before. And so he's finding himself covered where he used to be able to get a step on a cornerback or behind the safeties. So as of right now, they're going to have to find a way to mix these wide receivers up and maybe ask some of these guys to develop in a way or develop, I'm not going to say necessarily a skill set, but kind of add a little bit more to their game to where they can be more helpful in different areas of the field and not just be kind of niche players. Guyton's not going to be able to just be a deep threat guy. He's not showing that he's successful in that regard right now anyway. So he's going to have to be able to and be willing to, kind of attack the middle of the field, maybe outside to the numbers. And he's not a hands catcher either. But at this point, we just need to be able to move the ball down the field however they can. So the wide receivers are going to have to step up big time. And Herbert's going to have to give some of that trust to some guys that maybe he doesn't necessarily feel like he has the most confidence in. But right now, beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of Guyton this week, and he looks ripped. Like he looks like he's put on some serious muscle mass. And you kind of wonder if that was him in response to getting hurt, or if that's something the team asked him to do. But hopefully it didn't take away the one thing that he did, pretty well, which is being a deep threat, because that's something they need. And I think that's something they've been waiting for from him. But it's just interesting. It seems like, he looks like he's built more like a possession receiver now than he is a deep guy. And that's just not his game, not from a route running perspective, not from a physicality perspective, not from a hands perspective. So it's interesting to see them take that step with him when you'd think they'd just be excited for him to come back and run a 4-2-3 and get behind the defense.
Yeah, my hope and prayer is that they find a way to get Darius Davis more involved in the offense vertically. It's where the team is suffering right now. And if the guy that you had as your vertical threat is no longer that, then someone has to step up and replace it because, you have to be able to at least threaten the top of the defense. And right now the Chargers are more of a horizontal medium type intermediate passing game team. And sometimes it can be very tough to watch, but if you want to find some room in the running game, particularly, you're going to have to be able to learn to or develop the opportunity to threaten the deep part of the field. And I think Darius Davis has that ability. He's just not being utilized in that way.
Wanted to bring this up, and then we can kind of wrap up the offense a little bit. So Casey says, you guys have talked a lot in the past about the team not having identity. Is it crazy to think that maybe it's a deliberate decision in that? What do you think, Craig? Do you think they have an identity? Do you think they maybe have the wrong identity in some situations? What's your take, especially on offense, about their identity?
So I guess if I'm understanding this correctly, what you're saying is they're trying to have more of the chameleon approach. They don't want to be known for doing just one thing in particular. Like, they don't want to give their hand, which, I mean, if that's the case, then okay. I mean, I understand not wanting to, have teams be able to come in and find you predictable. I just think that when you're talking about some of these better teams in the league, that you have to be able to establish something so that you can use it as a counter against them. If a team kind of knows you for one thing, because as much as they don't want to, or as much as people claim that they don't have an actual identity, I think they do. And personally, my feeling is their identity is that they're a finesse team. They want to be able to run outside zone, spread you out. And unfortunately, they want to operate more in the 5 to 7 step drops and push the ball, but they can't really do it. So they adapt during the game, and they get maybe a little bit more into the quick game. They throw a little bit of power in there, but it's also just to kind of loosen you up a bit so they can get back to what they really want to do. So ultimately, I don't think it's a deliberate thing that they're doing per se. I just think that they can't do what they want to do, and so they just try to work around it every game. If they go into the game being able to do what they like, they'll stick to it. But if they can't get it going, then they'll just try to throw in a couple of wrinkles here and there to loosen you up. And then if they can get back to what they really want, then they will. I would say that I appreciate that on the offensive side of the ball. I don't necessarily think that happens defensively. I think defensively, the scheme is the scheme. And I really don't know what to do about that. I don't know what they plan on doing about it. But on the offensive side of the ball, the identity is Justin Herbert, essentially. Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. How do I get the ball to Keenan Allen as many times as humanly possible, and let's sprinkle some Austin Eckler in there? Other than that, I don't think that you can say that they're a team that has much of a physical presence in the running game, because they don't really have a running game to speak of at all. They just do it to sometimes keep teams honest, and because technically you need to be able to run the ball on occasion. And they just want to hand the ball to 10 and let them go deal. And so ultimately, if you want to say what their identity is, to me, it's 10, go win it. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. See, I think on offense, particularly with the running game, I think they do have an identity. I think somebody in that building, I don't know if it's Staley, I don't know if it's Moore, I don't know if it's Telesco or Spanos, somebody really wants them to be an outside zone running team. And they'll run power and they'll have success with it, and then they'll just get away from it. And it seems like they're trying to mimic what McVay and Shanahan do, but they just don't do it well enough to mimic what they do. But they're not willing to go away from it. It's been the same. It was the same issue when Lombardi was here as the offensive coordinator. Yeah. It remains the same issue with Moore. And this was not really a staple of Moore's offense. One of the things that I liked about Moore's offense before he came over here was that in Dallas, they were multifaceted in the running game. They did a little bit of everything, and it made them hard to defend. And they're not really doing that anymore. So, again, I don't know whose call it is. I'm assuming it's probably Staley, since he's the head coach, and he's the one of the main constants between Lombardi and Moore. But it just seems like they'll find something that works, and then they'll get away from it. They do it in the passing game. They do it in the running game. And, I mean, nothing works on defense unless they're playing the Bears and the Jets. So it's hard to say that they get away from anything that works. They're just bad, which I guess is probably the best lead-in to talking about the defense since we haven't got there yet.
Trying to
So what are your thoughts on the defense?
All right. So let's start here. I've not been the most vocal about how I feel with regard to Brandon Staley, mostly because, I mean, not to save anyone's feelings about it, because I really don't care. It's just he's the coach of the team, so I try my best not to down him publicly. I might make some jokes here and there, but the truth of the matter is it's a wrap for this. As far as the defense is concerned, this week, this is the game we're all kind of circling to see exactly how the defense would perform, because now you're talking about having to play a more physical, balanced offense, and they wet the bed again. You're looking at a scenario where Brandon Staley rolls in and thinks that he can play soft off man and zone coverage against a team that can deploy multiple weapons in the passing game. For one, let's talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown. The sun god literally baked everyone today, specifically at the second and third levels of the defense. And even in the run game, where we thought that they were pretty stout, that got exposed today. And apparently, if a team has a pretty good offensive line, then the Chargers are going to be toast. This is not the Jets. This is not the Bears. That was fun for 2 weeks. This week you ran against a team or came up against a team that was more physical than you at the point of attack, and they were able to move you off of the ball all day, and you couldn't create any pressure to a quarterback who's basically, well, I'm not going to call Goff immobile. He's got decent mobility, but he didn't have to move anywhere all day. He was able to sit in the pocket all day long and basically pick you apart. So defensively, what it boils down to me is that we have a defensive quote-unquote mastermind who still hasn't figured out that the scheme has to adapt to the players. If you're playing a lesser offense, then you can get away with doing some of the stuff that you like to do because you just have a better skill set on the defensive side of the ball than the team you're going against. When you're talking about teams like the Lions and other of the top upper echelon teams in the NFL, you're going to have to use guys to play where they're most effective. Asking Alohi Gilman to be a split half safety is going to get you cooked. We know that. He's better where he can be disruptive in the middle of the field. If he can maybe click and close in diagnosing plays, maybe playing more of a robber as opposed to split safety deep. If you want to keep him around the box a little bit more, something like that is fine. But asking him to defend space is a mistake. Same as Eric Kendricks. Also Kenneth Murray. Same deal. The Chargers are expecting players who have athletic limitations to go out there and play in a more athletic way against guys who are more athletic than they are. And I just don't understand the rationale behind it. Yes, it worked for 2 weeks, but you have to consider the opponent. And this week, I feel like the Chargers just played how they always do. And Staley just stuck to his guns and essentially did what he feels like worked for 2 weeks in a row, and that it would just continue to. Maybe the guys were getting the scheme. They were adapting better. No, they just played lesser competition, and they got exposed this week. Couldn't stop the run. You couldn't stop the pass. And ultimately, it's unfortunate. But I think the Brandon Staley experiment just needs to be over. They're not going to get rid of him before the end of the season. But I've seen enough. We know who he is. We understand what he's capable of. And this is the product that he's put on the field after 3 years, and it's not good enough. So it's hard to have confidence in what happens moving forward because I don't know what adjustments can be made or if he's willing to actually make said adjustments. That's going to require some movement where personnel is concerned, and I don't think that they're willing to do that. Asking slower, older players at the second level, specifically Eric Kendricks, I'm sorry, but it's true, to do things that he's not capable of doing. You're coming out in base sets against 4 wide out situations where Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are having to drop into zones, and then you're forced in a 3-man rush, and you're not getting home with your 4. So what makes you think you're going to get it from your interior defensive linemen who aren't technically pass rushers on the inside? I just don't understand Staley's thought process behind many of these defensive calls, and the scheme it doesn't work against very, very good offenses.
Yeah, you mentioned you have to adjust the scheme to your personnel. I think there's a flip side of that too. You have to adjust the scheme to the opponent. And they're just running out there. It's like we're reliving Gus Bradley just with a different scheme, or John Pagano just with a different scheme. This is what we do. It may not be working, but this is what we do. They just need to figure it out. Well, maybe it's time for you to figure it out, since defense is supposed to be your specialty and you're running the same shit every week. And yeah, you look real good with, Tyson Bagent and Zach Wilson playing quarterback against you, but you get a halfway competent quarterback or something more than that, and you're toast. And I mean, Ben Johnson had a phenomenal game plan, and he had that defense in a spin cycle in absolutely hell all day long from play one. And it didn't matter if they were running between the tackles, if they were running outside the tackles. They did a great job with misdirection, with changing directions. They were just faster than the Chargers defense pretty much as a whole. Their offensive line manhandled the Chargers defensive line the entire game. You've got, Kenneth Murray, who's played well for a stretch this season, and Kendricks playing linebacker. And I mean, if there isn't a target, I mean, the target on Kendricks jersey right now is
every week
massive. It's every week, and teams are going after him, and he cannot run with anybody, and he's still out there. It is frustrating. And you see these guys taking bad angles. This defense does not change direction very well. They're not overly fast. They were getting beat to the edge consistently today. And you talk about the back end. I mean, you mentioned Alohi Gilman. Look, he was great the last 2 weeks, but there's a reason he was great the last 2 weeks. The reason he was great the last 2 weeks was because they weren't worried about anybody throwing the ball over their heads. And he could come downhill and attack everything in front of him. What did they do today? They tried to test his eye discipline. The Lions did. They were daring him to come up on underneath routes and throwing the ball over the top. And he could not adjust. He was getting beat left and right. A lot of that had to do with the fact that they were so effective running the ball on first and second down that they were just killing the Chargers with play action on second and third and short, pulling those safeties down deep, trying to stop the run, getting the ball over the top. Crossers, I mean, you name it. They just picked them apart, and they had Gilman in hell. The whole secondary was compromised today. I mean, it was one chunk play after another. So they were not prepared to play. They did not have the personnel to match up with the Lions, and they just whipped the Chargers at every level. That defense, despite being as highly paid as it is, despite having what most people consider two really, borderline elite pass rushers, there is no pass rush for this team when they play against a competent offensive line. None. I mean, not even a little bit. Did they even hit Goff today? It doesn't seem like it.
Well, they definitely didn't sack him, and I don't remember them getting next to any pressure on him whatsoever. He was pretty much clean the entire day. I mean, I think there's a book out on the Chargers defensively, and I'm pretty sure teams are going to take advantage of it moving forward, those that can, if they have the personnel to do it. Those shallow crossers, even the deep ones, they can't defend because the second level gets exposed. It's like you mentioned, as far as change of direction is concerned, and also eye discipline. They are fooled by everything on play action. But also Kenneth Murray in the middle of the field has no idea when he's in coverage how to basically he's guarding. If anyone threatens his zone at all, he immediately attaches to them. He doesn't guard his space properly. And when you're at the second level, I know that some people feel that you should guard a man, not an area. Well, no, you have to guard your area first. But he's going to where his help is. He's not staying in his zone and allowing his help to be his help. He's vacating his zone as soon as anyone threatens him, and he's leaving a humongous gap. And the Detroit Lions took advantage of that all day because he would veer too far over outside of his specific zone, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown or whomever would come right behind it, and it would force Alohi Gilman to have to chase. And if Alohi Gilman is in a chasing position, you're going to lose every single time. And not having someone that has good change of direction at the second level is like candy to a kid when you're talking about a team that likes to run a bunch of play action, because you can run those crosses behind that all day. Because if he takes a false step, he's completely out of the play, can't recover. And that's a problem for both of your inside linebackers. But you continue to trot them both out there and expect them to at some point be better about it. I don't understand what the logic is there. But again, I do think the book is out for the Chargers with regard to just if you want to attack them in just that one way. If you can establish any sort of run game against them, that's going to be open all day long.
Yeah, there are a lot of problems on that defense, and the back end is really alarming to me. I mean, Derwin is really struggling. Alohi is basically, a poor man's version of Derwin in terms of his skill sets and the things that he does well. Was Marlowe on the field much today? I don't remember seeing him a whole lot.
So that's the funny part. You asked that, and I thought about it during the game, and I meant to go look it up to see how many snaps he had, if at all, and I didn't get a chance to do it. I don't feel like I saw Marlowe whatsoever in the game at all. And if he didn't play, that is a huge mistake. And also, if he did, I'm not sure how they deployed him, because Marlowe was really good for the snaps that he's taken throughout the season at being your deep safety and stopping those bigger plays from happening up top. Where I think, again, a lot of where the Chargers were beat were across the middle of the field and making guys have to run and chase after basically taking bad angles and having poor eye discipline. But Marlowe, I don't know. I don't think that I saw Marlowe play any snaps. He may have, but I missed him if he did.
Yeah, he certainly. I mean, the good thing about Marlowe is when he's on the field, he kind of just blends in and you don't see a lot of him. So it's possible that was the case, but it just seemed like Gilman was constantly chasing people today.
Right.
Yeah, to me it just seemed like they were attacking him and he was a couple steps behind on every single crosser they ran at any level. It was pretty frustrating to watch. So we've lit up the defense at this point. What would you do at this point to try to breathe some life into the defense or fix things for the rest of the season? Or is there anything they can do?
There's one thing that I feel they could do, but I don't think will happen. I think it's time for Brandon Staley to hand the defensive play calling over to Derek Ainsley. Apparently there's too much going on for him to have to handle. Outside of just the defensive calls, as far as just managing the in-game stuff, there's just more questionable things happening. When you're looking at that 3rd and 14 call, situationally, you call a timeout, you go in and you discuss what your options are. And you come out, and the decision somehow, after you've had some time to think about it, is that you're going to rush 4 and play soft off. I don't know if it was man or zone, don't remember right now, but you're just going to essentially play at the sticks and allow a team that's shown you that you can't get to them with 4 and a quarterback that's diced you up all day to basically get the ball into his playmaker's hands. And if they get anywhere near the first down marker, they've already gone for it against you 4 times before to that point. What made you believe that they were just going to go for 3 there, especially since you've been marching up and down the field on them offensively? Why would they take 3 and allow you to potentially go get 7 to win the game? Nothing about that makes sense. So for me, I think there has to be some level of brain trust associated between both he and Ainsley. And I don't know whether there is or not, but making that call or making defensive calls throughout the game based on situation, maybe you need to take that out of Brandon Staley's hands. If he wants to have some input, fine, but let Ainsley have a crack at it. I can't imagine it's going to be much worse because right now, just game management and as far as, all of the things that go along with that, but also calling defense, it just feels like it's too much for Staley to have to handle. If they don't do that, I don't know what else you can change because Staley hasn't proven that he's able to basically take the reins and be able to manage all of the things that he's responsible for right now. So maybe taking something off of his plate is an option.
Yeah, I like the idea of giving Ainsley some play calling responsibilities or maybe giving him all the play calling responsibilities. I think we need to see more of Dion Henley on the field. I thought we'd see a lot of him on 3rd down this season. It hasn't panned out that way. I just think they have to get Kendricks off the field. I mean, I know he's a veteran and they're waiting for him to figure it out and step up, but he wasn't very good last year. He's playing at least a step, maybe a step and a half to 2 steps too slow right now. He can't cover anybody. He's really not impacting the defense at all. I think from an athleticism standpoint, you're probably better even with the inexperience with Murray and Henley at linebacker. I think we've seen enough of Michael Davis at this point. I don't know what's going on with him, but he has not been very good this year. He's struggling even with the press man coverage, which is supposed to be his strength. I think we need to see it's time to see more of Dean Leonard, I think, at corner. Maybe more of a heavy rotation, rotating them for a couple series at a time, just to see what Leonard looks like, and see if there's anything there moving forward. Yeah, but other than that, I mean, more Marlowe on the field, I think for sure. They're just better with him playing deep, in my opinion. I know they like Gilman, and I know he played well the last 2 weeks, but I think teams that can actually throw the football are really able to compromise him and put him in difficult situations. And I don't think he's a long-term answer, and I don't think he's somebody they should be committed to at this point. So I think that's something to examine too. Maybe playing some more 3 safety looks so they can play Gilman down in the box at times. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but they need to figure out something at safety because they're really limited right now. And between being limited with Gilman and being limited at linebacker, they've got some issues they have to address.
Yeah, I don't think Davis played very much today. I think he played a few plays and then went out sick or something for the remainder of the game. And Dean Leonard ended up getting, I think, the majority of the run for the rest of the game. He had some pretty good plays here or there. Of course, by not being one of the main guys that sees action, he did kind of get, a little toasted here and there a few times, but it's to be expected. He's not a regular as far as your DBs are concerned. But at this point, I don't think it makes very much sense for a rotation to be the thing because we saw how that worked out with J.C. Jackson. You're probably going to get complaints about that. And this is probably Davis's last year as a Charger anyway. It just feels like Staley's going to ride or die with the guys that he's been with to this point. And he's just going to, if he's going to captain the ship and it's going to sink, he's going to go with the guys that got him where he is. It's unfortunate because when you talk about a reset, and that's the term that keeps being used, I don't see what really was reset. You just so happen to catch a couple of bad teams and you beat them the way that you should. And I think they took that for granted. Essentially assumed that because what they did specifically defensively worked for 2 weeks against 2 anemic offenses. I mean, I'm talking about the Bears who just had 295 total yards against the Carolina Panthers, and the Jets, the last time I checked in the game they're playing right now, had about 231 against the Raiders. I mean, they're not putting up points or yardage against anyone. So that goes to show you just how anemic those offenses were, and that the Chargers, maybe we were given a little bit of fool's gold there. And it's unfortunate because in those games, they played some dominant football and you saw guys making plays all over the field, and it led you to believe that maybe they were on to something. But there was a very real correlation between the level of competition they were playing and that performance. And now we're just seeing it for what it is. Where the changes are concerned, outside of just Ainsley calling plays, I think we've all been screaming for more Deion Henley now. Because where they seem to me to be the most vulnerable is at the second level. And if they can get someone who can defend the pass, which is what his specialty is at this point in time, him being the more athletic, even more so than Murray. I mean, Murray's, you go look at those RAS scores and saw that he ran a 4.5 40 and all that's great, but he's terrible with change of direction. Henley is a very fluid athlete. Give that guy an opportunity to show what he can do, and it could help to cover up for some of those deficiencies on the back end. Maybe it helps you with having the quarterback hold the ball a tick or too longer on some of those crosses because that window doesn't open up fast as quickly. And so you don't have Alohi Gilman chasing wide receivers from behind. And instead, it gives you that additional second for your pass rushers to maybe get home. As far as anything else goes, one of the other issues that I feel like the Chargers have that I don't know that they can do anything about this season is the lack of interior presence from a pressure perspective. Everything that they want to happen is coming from their edge rushers, whether it's running them on twists to get pressure up the middle, which is great when it works. But I mean, if you can't just line up with 4 defensive linemen, which is what Staley wants to do, and affect the quarterback in the place that they hate the most, which is right up the gut, then you're asking a lot from your edge rushers to win more often than not, especially against some of the premier tackles in this league. They need an interior defensive presence badly. And right now, they don't have a real disruptor. Those guys have played pretty well against the run, but they're not putting pressure in guys' face up the middle. And I mean, it's another way that you could possibly use a Deion Henley if you want to have to add a rusher to the mix, because I think that's what you're going to have to do if you want to generate some more pressure. But it's whether or not Staley is going to be willing to get out of his way, his own way, and basically stop bumping his head against the wall, man. You're going to have to mix it up a bit. And if you're going to go down with the ship, go down swinging. But if he's just going to stay the same, then expect more of the same for the remainder of the season. We're just going to have to all ride it out.
Yeah. So do you think the Chargers fire Staley at the end of the year?
I do. I don't see it getting turned around, especially if they don't make the playoffs. And at this point, I mean, we're talking about 5 losses, and I'm looking at the schedule and the type of team that they're going to have to play, because see this physicality that they dealt with today, there's more of that on the way, at least 2 to 3 more times. And if they're not able to stand up against that, and if Herbert can't put on the cape every single game, then they won't make the playoffs. And I don't know how you can excuse Brandon Staley for another year.
Yeah, I think my only hesitation, well, there are 2. One is they just don't normally fire coaches before their contract is up. And this is year 3. So history suggests that he probably will be back. 2 is they started 2-4. If they wind up winning 9 games, even if they don't make the playoffs, I could see them convincing themselves that he turned it around and deserves to be back. Now, having said that, and I've seen a lot of talk about this in the chat tonight, there's been a lot of talk about Harbaugh. A lot of talk about Harbaugh in the chat, and I don't know if all of you are aware. I know some of you here in the Discord, and you've been with us on the shows before, but there have been talks with Harbaugh. We know this. And we know that he has expressed an interest in returning to the NFL. He said he's willing to move to LA, and there seems to be a mutual interest there. Will that happen? Who knows? But it seems like they're at least exploring experienced head coaches, and they had this talk as early as week 2 with Harbaugh. So I do think it's a possibility. I think it's something that they're realizing that they're losing footing in LA, and I think they need to be taken seriously. And Staley is hurting them in that regard. So I think it's a possibility. Do I think they fire Staley? I think the odds are increasing, but I still think they would need to have a losing record to end the season. Probably a significant losing record to fire him, like maybe double-digit losses.
So here's the thing about that. The fact that they were willing to start those conversations and have loose talks with Harbaugh just after week 2 tells me a bunch. That says that you're hedging your bet already. 2 weeks into the season is really wild to me. We're not even talking about a quarter of the way through. Literally week 2, having those talks means that it's something that they're considering strongly, and that they know that you're probably not going to be able to bank on this being successful. If you're talking about Brandon Staley getting through this year and them getting to 9 wins, okay, great. But at some point, the Span and I are going to have to take a step back and look at the schedule the same way that we are able to, and look at the level of competition. If you close out your year and you're playing some subpar teams that are maybe on the brink themselves or actually have no opportunity to make the playoffs, and you beat up on them, okay, great. You can beat bad teams, but you can't compete against the good ones. And once again, it feels like year by year, they're starting to understand, or at least come to the conclusion, that in order to be competitive, they're going to have to do some things out of the ordinary that they haven't typically done. When you're talking about adding some more of these higher level players at Staley's request, of course, that's not something we've seen the Chargers do a ton of. The J.C. Jackson swing and miss didn't work out, but that's not something the Chargers would have done in the past. And I've said this now for a bit. I'm encouraged by the fact that they do seem to be doing things a bit out of the norm. So, yeah, they typically don't let the coaches go before the end of the contracts. But at this point, with all of the talk surrounding Staley, the fact that he's continuously being embarrassed at the thing that he's supposed to be the best at, I don't know how you can just allow that or essentially explain it away or back it up for another year without feeling like you're going to lose fan support. I mean, there are the fans out there that, they bleed powder blue, and no matter what the Chargers do, they're going to be down for it. And they'll never they'll excuse it away. They'll be apologists. That'll be their thing. Great. But if we're talking about being a larger market now and also trying to have a foothold in LA, then you're going to have to make some big swings. And Harbaugh would be one of the biggest swings you can make. And I don't think that it's that far out of the realm of possibility that they'd be willing to do it. Now, I know some people, I actually just saw it in the chat, are asking about Fodder and Telesco. I wouldn't be surprised if Telesco sticks around if they can get a Harbaugh, because I don't believe that Telesco honestly does much more than be a middleman. I know a lot of people like to place blame at him for the players that the team gets, but Telesco works very closely with the coaches to get the types of players that they want. So essentially, he just serves as a conduit between head coach John Spanos and the rest of upper management ownership. Just kind of does his thing there in the middle, and he's also there to take bullets for the Spani if necessary. And it's kind of hard to find a guy that'll hold the water like that and be willing to do it for over a decade. So that level of job security comes for a reason. But I don't know. Ultimately, I could see them making a move for an established head coach. I know a lot of people out there want Ben Johnson, but I don't know why anyone else wants another first-time head coach. We see how that works. And it's not to say that a guy like Ben Johnson wouldn't be a great head coach, but what tells you that they won't try to basically neuter him the same way they've done a lot of these other first-time coaches as well? So got to take that into consideration.
Yeah, you must have read my mind. I think that's a perfect lead in, because you were talking about firing Telesco if they hire Harbaugh. I don't think that's a necessity or a reality. And I think you put it perfectly. Telesco is there, in my opinion, to buffer between Spanos and the head coaches, and he is there to carry out the head coach's vision. Now, do I think he should get to participate in potentially hiring a fourth coach? No, I don't. I think if they hire Harbaugh, they should fire Telesco. But I think because Telesco is mainly there to carry out the head coach's vision, and because I don't think he has as much say in the players as people think he does, I could easily see Harbaugh being okay with keeping Telesco, because if he's just there to go get the players that Harbaugh wants, then why would Harbaugh want to fire him? And Harbaugh's going to need a buffer between him and John. So I think there's some value there to keeping Telesco on, at least in Harbaugh's eyes. Would I do it? No, I would fire him. I would have already fired him, but I'd be okay with firing him at this point too.
Here's the thing. Do you really think the Spanos want to deal with Jim Harbaugh directly?
I don't think anybody does.
No. He's like, he rubs people the wrong way. Give him about a year and everyone will hate him. He gets results, but he does it his way. He can be a bit of a curmudgeon, and that won't fly well with John. I'm sure that would be a problem. So, no, they definitely need someone to play middleman between the two of them. And again, you kind of had a guy that's been there for over a decade doing it already. So why have to break in someone new?
Yeah, I agree. I just think John's going to need somebody to protect him from Harbaugh if they hire him. And I think Telesco is the crash test dummy in that situation. So moving on, let's get a couple more comments here and then we'll wrap this up. I saw one that I wanted to grab. Well, one question that I saw, and I forget who posted it, was would we prefer Belichick or Harbaugh? So, Craig, if you were hiring the next head coach, would you prefer Belichick or Harbaugh?
I'll take Harbaugh just because, I haven't seen the Belichick way work other than with Tom Brady. And that is a very different way to go about running a team and an organization. You probably also absolutely have to step away and allow him to, he's not the best at picking players, but he may want to be able to have that level of say-so to come to another team and leave New England. And again, the Belichick way doesn't seem to work without, it's proven to work in one place. And it's not to say that it won't work or wouldn't work anywhere else. Just, I don't know. It's just something about the way that he goes about doing things that I don't feel like will work in LA per se.
So I would take Harbaugh because I think we've seen some things from Belichick the last few years that suggest that maybe, even though I'm sure he was a large part in the secret sauce in New England, he just had a generational quarterback. As much as we all hate Brady, I think we can all agree the guy was a generational talent, and he's arguably the best quarterback in the history of the league. Definitely the best if you go off of wins and Super Bowl wins. So I would not take Belichick in his 70s. I think let somebody else deal with that mess. I don't know how that works. But I would take Harbaugh. In fact, Harbaugh was the guy that I wanted to hire the last coaching cycle when they hired Staley. He was my number one. I didn't think they would do it, but he was the guy that I wanted. And I think there are some things there. We talked about them possibly keeping Telesco if they hire Harbaugh. I think you could make a valid point that it's likely that they would keep Moore if they hire Harbaugh. And I think it goes a little something like this. I think if you look at the situation with Moore, he's had at best mixed results for the first 9 games of his first season at Chargers as Chargers offensive coordinator. I would assume that he probably wants to be a head coach at some point. And he's not getting hired as a head coach. He has not yet. And I would not think he's going to based on the first 9 games as offensive coordinator. Now that could change, but based on what we've seen so far, I don't think he's getting hired as a head coach. So with that being said, what's the best way to elevate your stock as a head coach? Play for a guy who's won, who is going to win. And I think if you also look at it long term and you say, okay, well, Harbaugh's a guy who probably is only going to be here for 5 or 6 years before he burns his bridges and has to move on. So if you're Moore and you're looking at it and you're saying, well, I'd love to keep working with Herbert, and I know we're going to win if Harbaugh's the head coach, and he's probably going to give me free reign with the offense. And if we win, I'm looking at a head coaching job within a year. And if not, in 4 or 5 years, I could arguably be looking at a head coaching job, depending on how things are going down the line with Harbaugh. So I think there are arguments that you could make for him staying, and it could either work out for him as a head coach with the Chargers, or it could work out with him as a head coach for somebody else as soon as 2025. So I think they could retain Telesco if that's something they're motivated to do. I think they could retain Moore if that's something they're motivated to do. And I think it could work out in a lot of ways. So I don't think that's an unrealistic argument or point for bringing in Harbaugh. But I would hire him. I just think, he's going to win. The guy's won, 70+% of his games as an NFL head coach. He's won at every level of football that he's coached at. Yeah. So I know people don't like the guy. They think he's weird. They think he's a bully. Most successful football coaches are bullies and egomaniacs. You have to be to operate.
They think he's a cheater now too, by the way.
Yeah, well, I'd be open to it. I think it would be successful, and I think it's good for the team. So if they do it, I would love it. We shall see if it happens.
Yeah.
And like this point says here, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to pronounce her name because I will bully it. I'll butcher it. But They would actually win in the trenches with John Harbaugh because that's his staple. They would run the ball well, they would stop the run, and they'd get to the quarterback. So that in and of itself is a reason to bring Harbaugh in my opinion.
All of football is actually not that complicated. It's not as complicated as people want it to be. The basis of the game has been the same for years. Certain elements of it have changed because of the rules, so it lends more to like the air raid style, and it's more leaning towards offense. But the fact of the matter is if you've got a dominant trench game and you're able to attack the quarterback, then you're going to be a successful team more often than you won't. You can even get by with a less than high level quarterback. See what the 49ers are doing? There's a reason why teams like that succeed more often than not. If you go look at the core of them and what they do well, it's pretty much all the same. They control the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They're able to run the ball, and they have a quarterback that can at least manage the game. Harbaugh has proven at basically every level that philosophy flies everywhere you go. And the difference between, I say this all the time, the difference between college and the NFL is you can win a bunch of games in college off of talent. NFL, the cream of the crop, comes down to, yes, having great talent, but also great coaching to back it up. And the more that you slack on coaching, the more that you want to be cheap in regards to your coaches, the less I think you should expect to be successful. So bringing Harbaugh in would, be music to my ears. He was one of the guys that I was on board with getting last year. I mean, I was a Brian Daboll guy too, just because I saw what he did with Allen in Buffalo. But I mean, if you were giving me an option between whether we could get Brian Daboll or Jim Harbaugh, I would have picked Harbaugh just because I want an experienced head coach, and he's done it before. So there's that.
Let's grab this and then we'll call it we'll wrap things up here. Benson James says if Staley's out, Kellen should be in as head coach. Herbert doesn't have to learn a whole different system again. I hope you're talking about on an interim basis this year. Like if they fire Staley during the season, Kellen should be in as an interim head coach. I do not think we've seen anything from Kellen that suggests he should be the head coach on a full-time basis if Staley gets fired. I don't think that makes sense at all. I understand wanting to keep the system the same for Herbert. I think there's validity to that argument, but I think you bring in an experienced head coach who's maybe willing to retain Kellen. Because I'm not sure Kellen's going to get a head coaching job anywhere else. And I wouldn't be in a rush to give him one. I would want to see more out of his system with Herbert before I did that. And I'm kind of 50-50 on even if I even want to see that at this point. So interim is one thing, but making him the head coach for the next 4 years, like Craig said, I don't think they have the infrastructure to support a first-time head coach. I think they've proven they don't. And I'm not sure Kellen is the kind of leader that's going to be successful at this point as a head coach.
Just to piggyback off that, I've said it a bunch of times. I hadn't actually watched a lot of Kellen Moore just say pressers before he arrived. And the more I pay attention to him, the more green he seems. Like he just doesn't come off as this is going to sound cliche, quote unquote, leader of men. But I know that that's not always necessary, but just something about him, it doesn't really ignite you. It doesn't make you feel like, okay, that's a guy that the players are going to want to run through a wall for, or he's going to instill a type of discipline that the team would need, because they are still a very undisciplined unit. And I don't get that impression that he's that type of guy. And by the way, if they fired Moore, the playbook's going to be what it is. That's not changing. Those players are going to be what they are, and that's what they're going to run. They're not going to change the system as a whole. But yeah, if they were going to, let him have a turn at being the interim coach, if they got rid of Staley, that's one thing. I'm not sure how that goes long term for the remainder of the season, should I say? But yeah, if you're talking about firing him and then rolling Kellen Moore, basically elevating up to that head coaching position, he doesn't strike me as one of those guys that can get it done. And personally, I think he needs to kind of cook for a few more years and give himself an opportunity to learn and become more of that leader, because I don't get that vibe from him at all.
I said we were done after this one. Let's go with one more because I think it's an interesting discussion. So Chorizo Compapa says the problem is that Herbert is the only appeal we have to offer coaches. No cap, basic draft capital, aging veterans, few young, proven bright stars at key positions. So the cap, I think, is not going to be an issue. Teams always solve their cap problems. The Chargers solved their cap problems this offseason. They're going to solve it again next offseason. It's going to happen with some cuts that need to happen. I think you're more than likely looking at Mike Williams being cut because I don't think there's any way they can move on from Keenan at this point, and you just can't keep paying Mike what they're paying him. I think you're going to lose one of, if not both, Mac and Bosa. We've talked about this before. I could see Mac being gone as a cut. I could potentially see Joey retiring. I'm not sure how much more he has left to prove. The injuries are adding up. I could just see him wanting to move on and being done with football. And that right there pretty much solves most of the cap problems. So I think the cap is something they can address. Basic draft capital. Maybe they make a couple trades, trade a couple other stars and add some draft picks. But I think Herbert is a pretty significant draw. You start with Herbert and Allen. You know, you've got Thule, Derwin. I'm sure coaches are going to be excited about coaching Derwin, especially a defensive guy like Harbaugh. So I think they have pieces that they can draw a proven head coach. They're going to have to make some changes. I think we all knew that going into this season. There are going to have to be some changes to the roster, but that happens with everybody at some point. It's just time to reset the roster and start fresh and get younger and faster because this team is just not fast enough.
Yep, that was proven today. They do lack team speed still somehow after all this time, unfortunately. But in Ed McGuire, I trust with regards to getting everything situated cap-wise. Just to kind of echo what Jamie mentioned, I think they'll get it situated this offseason. It's going to have to come through some cuts, maybe some more potential restructures on guys. But when you're talking about high-level players, like essentially, especially when we're talking about offensive coaches, they get googly eyes when they see a potential elite quarterback, a top of the league guy like a Herbert, because they feel like they can basically meld what they want to do offensively around that. And if they have a vision and players that are currently in place that can make that system work, which, by the way, I know how we all feel about the Chargers offensive line. Jamari Salyer and Zion are still very good interior. Well, they have the potential to be very good interior offensive linemen. They have the skill set to do it. And I feel like under the right coaching staff, they can be molded to be such. They're going to have to look for a center replacement. Don't know what's going on with Corey Linsley, but even if he comes back, they're still going to have to take care of that. And then you've got, of course, Rashawn Slater at left tackle. There are more pieces there than you think that would be attractive to a coach coming in, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And you mentioned Derwin James is like the heartbeat of the defense, along with Thule, who is performing above what a lot of people's expectations were. A pass rusher. So we're talking about quarterback, guys that could potentially get it done in the interior offensive line, a left tackle, which is also a franchise must-have, and a great, again, I think I mentioned Thule already as a pass rusher, but also Derwin James, who, if used properly, is still a top of the league safety if you're asking him to do the things that he does well. So there are more pieces that I think are attractive than what maybe you think there are. And honestly and truly, depending on the type of head coach that comes in, some of these guys are ideal for those types of schemes.
Saw this, had to throw it up there. What do you think about him talking about your mom, Craig?
Listen, hold on. Oh, I don't know. I mean, cool, I guess. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hopefully we gave you some stuff to think about and took your mind off of a disappointing loss, maybe some therapy. I know we enjoyed it. Remember, more shows coming your way this week. We've got the mailbag, the roundtable on Tuesday. Garrett's got Score More on Wednesday. I've got another walkthrough for Thursday, and Craig's got I Got 5 on it on Friday. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for supporting. If you haven't already done so, make sure you go like and subscribe on YouTube. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you.
Salute.